Wait a minute, something was coming into focus. One of the chapters in Gentry's book discussed God coming in the clouds in Old Testament times, usually in judgment. I didn't realize how many times the Lord came down in the Old Testament. This first example isn't necessarily with the clouds, but it specifically says that he came down. Now we understand that this is not a physical appearance of God, but a coming in power to destroy his enemies.
Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the field of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens poured. The clouds also poured water. The mountains gushed before the Lord, this Sinai before the Lord God of Israel. The Lord came down for me against the mighty. Judges 5, verses 3 through 5 and in 13. God delivering Israel from the Canaanites.
These next passages describe God as coming in clouds in judgment upon his enemies and deliverance of his saints.
Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations of the hills also quaked and were shaken, because he was angry. Smoke went up from his nostrils, and devouring fire from his mouth. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens also, and came down with darkness under his feet. And he rode upon a cherub and flew. He flew upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness his secret place. His canopy around him was dark waters and thick clouds of the skies. From the brightness before him, his thick clouds passed with hailstones and coals of fire. Psalm 18, 7 through 12. God delivering David from his enemies and from Saul.
He lays the beams of his upper chambers in the waters, who makes the clouds his chariot, who walks on the wings of the wind. Psalm 104, verse 3.
The burden against Egypt. Behold, the Lord rides on a swift cloud and will come into Egypt. The idols of Egypt will totter at his presence, and the heart of Egypt will melt in its midst. Isaiah 19, verse 1. The Lord judging Egypt.
Blow the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming, for it is at hand. A day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness, like the morning clouds spread over the mountains. Joel 2, verses 1 through 2. The Lord judging Israel.
The Lord has his way in the whirlwind and in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. Nahum 1, verse 3. The Lord judging Nineveh.
The great day of the Lord is near. It is near and hastens quickly. The noise of the day of the Lord is bitter. There the mighty men shall cry out. That day is a day of wrath, a day of trouble and distress, a day of devastation and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. Zephaniah 1, verses 14 through 15. God's warning to Judah prior to her captivity by the Babylonians, circa 586 BC.
Now I don't have a problem believing that God did all those things in the Old Testament, and that he did come down in a manner of speaking. So now I'm thinking, what is there between Malachi and Matthew that says that this same type of language in the New Testament doesn't apply to Christ coming in a similar manner in AD 70? Especially when you compare the apocalyptic language of these Old Testament passages with the language of Jesus and John's prophecies about the second coming. Have you ever noticed how many New Testament passages associate Christ's coming with the clouds? Check out these references.
Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Matthew 24, verse 30.
Again the high priest asked him, saying to him, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, and coming with the clouds of heaven. Mark 14, verses 61 through 62.
Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 17.
Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even they who pierced him. And all the tribes of the earth will mourn because of him. Even so, Amen. Revelation 1, verse 7.
Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. Revelation 14, verse 14.
When Jesus told the Sanhedrin that they would see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, Caiaphas tore his robe. Why? Because Jesus claimed to be able to walk on the clouds? No, it was because he understood what coming in the clouds meant. Jesus was equating himself with God, who had come in the clouds in the Old Testament. Caiaphas cried out, "He has blasphemed." Because of their Jewish background, Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin understood perfectly what coming in the clouds meant. Yet we have already established that God never came down physically when he rode on those Old Testament clouds. And now Jesus is describing his second coming in the very same language. Furthermore, earlier in his ministry, Jesus stated that the Father had given all judgment to him. Shouldn't we expect Jesus to judge in the same manner that the Father had judged in the Old Testament? So now I'm asking myself, could it be that the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 was Jesus coming in judgment upon those who had rejected and crucified him and persecuted his saints? My partial fulfillment idea was starting to take shape.